Good evening. Welcome to Quorum. I'm Wilson Stribling. I'll be your host on the 2011 season of Quorum on Mississippi Public Broadcasting. Tonight we have some of the state legislature's most powerful leaders on our discussion panel. These lawmakers have a serious challenge ahead of them, crafting a state budget. If you have a child in public school, if you drive on a public road, if you or a loved one depends on state aid to pay your medical bills, then you will be directly affected by the state budget, just like every other Mississippian. Budget writing is by no means the only task ahead for the legislature, but because of its huge impact, we'll begin with a look at the budget and work our way forward. Now, here is a recap of developments so far at the state capitol in Jackson. The 2011 session began on January 4th, but leaders of the House and Senate were hard at work before that. They've presented the rank and file with a joint budget recommendation for fiscal 2012, which begins July 1st. It's a lean budget by most accounts. It's based on an estimate that state revenue will grow by just 1.3% in fiscal 2012. That leaves lawmakers with $4.480 billion in the general fund. The joint recommendation would use more than $936 million in non-recurring funds to fill some gaps. But Mississippi can no longer draw from the federal stimulus effort. That money has all but run out. Total state support comes to $5.4 billion, a 1.1% drop from last year. Most agencies and programs would see budget reductions between 1 and 7%. Agriculture and Commerce down 3%. The Mississippi Development Authority cut by 7%. Higher education would lose almost 2% of its state funding. K through 12 education is cut far less, but once again, the state would fail to completely fund the Mississippi Adequate Education Program. There are serious concerns about the budget for the Department of Mental Health. That agency stands to lose over 4%, and Director Ed LeGrand warns that some public facilities could be closed as a result. The Emergency Management Agency stands to lose 5%. On the other hand, some departments, like corrections, will see much smaller cuts. And the legislature itself, this recommendation would raise its funding by 3%. Some lawmakers have already objected to this budget blueprint, but they'll struggle to find additional money for everything. What's more, they have to consider the budget priorities of the man with veto power, Governor Haley Barbour.
As governor, I've cut the budget by a total of about $700 million in just the last 2 years. Just as our constituents have had to cut back, they expect state government to cut back. They know the alternative is raising taxes.
Citizens want to be heard too when it comes to spending priorities and dire needs in our communities.
I want people who care about these children to work with them. I do not want my children with behavior problems to feel like they're being thrown away. As a parent, it gets tiresome and no one can provide us the help.
That's Shaletta Nash. She's the mother of a special needs child. She and others testified at a joint education and health hearing on the problems their kids are having getting a quality education while coping with mental illness. They are pushing lawmakers to consider improvements in mental health evaluation in public schools. Meantime, another parent complained of legislation coming out of the House.
What they have done on the House side and the committee that actually presented and submitted this law has insulted my child. It is not the real Nathan's Law.
That's Lori Key, the mother of a child killed when a driver sped around his school bus. She joined a group of senators and Lieutenant Governor Phil Bryant to denounce the House version of Nathan's Law. They say it doesn't go far enough in punishing drivers who illegally pass stopped school buses. Senators quickly passed a tougher version of Nathan's Law. Whether the House will consider it remains to be seen. Other public safety issues include social host legislation. It would punish adults who allow underage drinking on private premises. A social host bill is now making its way through the House. We'll get to many of these issues this hour. First, our guests from the Mississippi State Legislature. Senator Bryan is with us. He's a Democrat from Itawamba, Lee, and Monroe counties, and he chairs the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee. Also from the Senate, Terry Burton. He's a Republican representing Lauderdale, Newton, and Scott counties. He's a member of the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. From the House and also a member of the Budget Committee is George Flaggs, Jr. He is a Democrat from Warren County. He chairs the House Banking and Finance Committee. His colleague, Representative Mark Baker, is a Republican representing Madison and Rankin counties. He is the minority leader in the House of Representatives. Of course, we want you to join in the conversation. Our toll-free phone line is open. Dial 1-877-405-5247 with your questions for our guests. That's 1-877-405-5247. You can also email your questions to quorum@mpbonline.org. And you can join the discussion on Twitter as well. Follow us at twitter.com/mpbonline. Gentlemen, let's start with the 2012 budget. Senator Burton, you're a member of the Budget Committee. What are your thoughts on the budget proposal as it stands?
Well, I think the Legislative Budget Committee did the very best that it could do, given the circumstances that we have, given the numbers that we have to work with, and given the fact that Representative Flaggs and I and the other members of the committee have to look 18 months ahead at the end of the budget year we're funding. Beginning with this session, we'll begin the process, but 18 months from now is when that budget will stop and we go into the next year. So we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what the economy is going to do nationally. We know what we think is going to happen here in the state, and we know what we think and hope is going to happen on the national level. But given the parameters we have to work with, I think we did the best we could in coming with a recommendation, and we hope the situation gets better before we leave town and we can do better.
Representative Flaggs, when the Joint Budget Committee presented the blueprint, you had some concerns. What were they?
Well, I've always said that I tend to agree with my colleague, Senator Burton. I think it's a great starting point. I think we did as best we could under the circumstances that we were surrounded with. But at the same time, I think there are some earmarks that we did not address, but as a matter of priority, because we didn't have the money. And I think that's where the difference is in the earmarks. And if we fund those earmarks, I feel confident that we won't be sending no unfunded mandate to the local level. And that's my concern, that at the end of the day, when we balance this budget, we not only brag about saving money, but we'll be able to say that we sent a budget to the governor that is signed into law and did not send any unfunded mandate to the local level.
Representative Baker, what do House Republicans think of the budget?
Well, there are no House Republicans on the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, and so we look at it from the outside in. None were appointed nor have served in this last term. It's a wait-and-see look for us. We're comparing that in relation to the governor's budget. We've been in consultation with Lieutenant Governor, Senator Davis, and we want to come together to reach reach common ground and find a solution. It's a very good start. I got to give them credit for what they've done. There are a lot of footnotes in the budget that we've got to look at. Footnotes mean if this money comes, if this happens, if this. You have 14 or 15 if this is. You have problems that you have to address. I feel confident that we'll get to those issues and we'll address them, but it's going to be a lot of backing and forth before we get to that point.
And that speaks to the speculative nature of it all, that like Senator Burton was talking about, doesn't it?
Well, for the most part it does, but sooner or later you've got to put the period on it, and you've got to have a budget. And how you get to that point with those what ifs is what we're here about and going to have to address before the session.
Senator Bryan, your take on the budget recommendation?
I completely disagree with the legislative budget recommendation. I don't serve on the budget committee. I'm not on the appropriations committee. I want to make it clear I disagree with this budget. I disagree with the budget that was passed last year. The cuts that have been imposed are unnecessary. They're deeper than they need to be, and it's unconscionable to impose cuts as deep as these are and as unnecessary as they are at this point in the economic cycle. First of all, last year we ended with, I forget, $50 million, whatever it was, that lapsed, which means that the budget cuts from last year's budget were greater than they needed to be. We look at this year, we have the following amounts of money that I can find. And I think it's important to understand how complicated it is to extract from this Byzantine system we have what's really going on. But at the end of 2011, the middle of 2011, the end of this fiscal year, we will have about $200 million in the healthcare trust fund, in the rainy day fund. We'll have about $150 million in the healthcare trust fund. We'll have about $50 million in one of the governor's pots of money. We'll have about $100 million in another pot of money that the governor has got earmarked for repayment of federal grants during Katrina. If it ever happens that we have to repay them, meantime, there's this $100 million sitting there. We have about $100 million that Congress sent to us in an enhanced FMAP. It was basically additional stimulus money that Congress has sent us that hasn't been spent. So those funds are there that I've been able to locate. And as I say, I'm not a member of the Budget Committee and I'm not on appropriations. When you look at that amount of money and you look at, as you saw in the tape, there are children that need Medicaid services that have developmental problems and physical problems, and their parents are being told that the Medicaid services that they've received in the past are no longer available to them because of cutbacks in the Medicaid program. That's not right. We have 1,000 fewer school teachers than we had when all of this started. If you take 1,000 school teachers out of the system, which we've done, that means our children are not getting as good an education as they should get. That's not good for the future. And I could go on, but I think, just generally speaking, I disagree with where we've been headed, and I disagree with this proposal.
Well, Senator Bryan is right about some of those numbers, if not all. But we already, as was mentioned in the piece to open the show, already are spending over $900 million in one-time money to fund. And so there's some more one-time money out there. We need to be very careful about how much one-time money we spend. Sure, we're going to use part of the rainy day fund. We're going to use part of the other funds that are out there that Senator Bryan talked about. But we need to make sure that, number one, we don't tie a lot of one-time money up on recurring expenses that got us in the problems we've had in the past. And number two, to make sure that we have some money next year as well as that we might need this year to plug some holes. I think the priorities with the Legislative Budget Committee were very clear. Education, particularly catching up on our community college system and trying to fund adequate education as close to fully funded as possible, and mental health. Those are some of the priorities that the Legislative Budget Committee have out there that would address some of those issues.
Let me go to the House side over here. What are some of the specific programs or agencies that you're concerned
Well,
with?
Senator Bryan admitted that he's not on the Legislative Budget Committee and he's not on appropriations, so perhaps he may not know that being a member of the Legislative Budget, we are prohibited from using some of the money that's in a reserve account. So therefore, on that side of the street, we had to balance within the means of the money that was on the table. Now that we're on this side of the street, I think he's right. We have underfunded some agency, and we've put the cuts have been deeper, and I think we're going to look at it, particularly on the House side, and start addressing things as a priority, such as fully funded education, making certain the mental health crisis center stay open, making sure that the homestead exemption is fully funded, and debt service and other things. So I didn't mean to say that that we were going to address those, but by being on the Legislative Budget Committee, we was limited. And I think all fairness to the legislative process, to the Lieutenant Governor and to the Speaker of the House, I think at the end of the day, and the Governor in this, at the end of the day, you're going to see us come up with a budget that I think that is still progressive. We're in some economic hard time. The economy is coming back. It's coming back slow. We're not as growing as fast, but at least we're meeting the necessity of the state.
Representative Baker, your thoughts?
Well, looking from the outside in as we do, House Republicans have decided that what we're going to do is we're going to take all the appropriation bills as they get dropped, and we're going to pull them together, and we're going to look at the pie. Senator Bryan raises some good points. Those are the points that we've been trying to raise from various and sundry ways since this process has begun, and annually as it proceeds. We're going to look at these, and we're going to see where the footnotes are, where the dollars are, and we're going to try to make and pass the best budget we can, make it fiscally sound, and protect next year and the year after.
There's one thing that I think Representative Baker and I agree about, and that is how complex the budget procedure is. There's so many little funds here, yonder, and there. And Terry says, and I'm sure he's accurate, he says there's $900 million of one-time money being used in the budget. I don't disagree with that statement, but I think I would be able to have a different perspective on it if I sat down and looked at what $900 million he's talking about and analyzed it. You have to go through all these funds and double appropriations and all. It's much more complex than it needs to be, which makes it difficult to have meaningful discussions about the budget and the priorities.
Let's talk about the 3% that we mentioned in the open. Senator Burton, the 3% increase that's set for the legislature. Why is that in place, and what does that money pay for?
I'm assuming that increase is because we have a 120-day session at the beginning of each term. After an election, the first session of the legislature is 120 days rather than 90 days. So you have that extra 30 days of staff, you have that extra 30 days of operating expenses, paper, I mean the whole bit. So I'm assuming that that's what the 3% increase, there's no other reason to have an increase. It would have to be for that extra year, extra month of the legislative session, the first year of a term.
Representative Flags?
I agree with Senator Burton. And sometimes when we calculate the legislative appropriation, we take in consideration some of the joint committees, such as LBO, such as Superior Committee, and we have Redistricting Committee too. So when you look at the total amount of money that coming through the legislature for legislators, then it's there. But I agree with him, because we have a longer first year of the term, it requires more money. And that's the reason why you probably see an increase. But this legislature has done great with saving the money, particularly on the House side. We not hired, the Speaker operates the office with two persons in that office, and then we not hired, made any replacement. Employees hadn't got no raise, and I can go on and on. So I think for the most part, the legislature has been very good about very good stewards of the money for the taxpayer.
It's efficient.
And we took our cuts like everybody else during the last couple of years too. I mean, you know, we set the standard there as far as reducing our operating expenses. So if you have a 3% increase above an already cut budget to catch up that 1 month that you have to add on to the session that first year of a term, that's not a significant increase.
And we did something we'd never done before. In my 23 years, we cut all traveling from both House and Senate. Legislators had to travel on their own by any means necessary. So I think we have been great stewards of the taxpayers' dollar.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Excuse me. Both the House and the Senate moved quickly at the top of the session to pass an economic development bill. They approved a $75 million bond measure sealing the deal on a solar panel production facility in Hattiesburg. Officials from the Mississippi Development Authority convinced lawmakers to approve the loan to a company called Styon. They say it will bring $500 million in investment and more than 1,000 jobs to the state. Mississippi needs those jobs, of course, and many more in the years following the recession. State economist Darren Webb told lawmakers last week that the state has only just begun the process of economic recovery, and he warned that our growth rate will lag slightly behind the nation. While our economy should be stronger this year, Webb predicted that it will be 2015 before our employment numbers recover to pre-recession levels. Unemployment now stands at just under 10% in Mississippi, and fewer workers mean fewer taxpayers. That in turn means less money for state agencies and programs. So, Representative Baker, do you believe that the state is doing all it can to foster job growth?
I think it is. I mean, I think the Mississippi Development Authority is doing what it can. We in the legislature need to do some things too. I've introduced a net metering bill for the past 3 years. The net metering bill would go hand in hand with this economic development plan that we've passed that would allow you to sell back your energy that you create with the solar panels that we're going to make in Mississippi back to the power company.
Because that is done in other states, many other states, but not in Mississippi.
It's done in many other states.
Where you basically get a credit for the energy you're creating.
Right. I've got that bill introduced. I've introduced it for the past 3 or 4 years. I want to hopefully get some movement on that. The chairman of Public Utilities, Chairman Evans, has said that we're going to have some hearings on that, and hopefully he'll bring a bill out on that. It's time. There's some issues that we have to work through, but the net effect is that people out there, we've got to engage the public. They've got to know that when they make this investment, you know, there's a reason for it. We're saving energy, and at the same time, they've got to be able to recoup their investment. So we've got to work on our tax breaks, formulate plans to help them purchase these things or make it easy, encourage the purchase of these things. Already a lot of federal tax breaks involved. But get this net metering bill in place. We've got to do it.
Senator Bryan?
Well, the issue of unemployment is certainly a serious one. One of the things that's troubling to me is that we are not on a national level and also on a state level taking advantage of this opportunity of incredibly low interest rates to renew our infrastructure. The wealth of the United States consists of our human infrastructure and our physical infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our highways, our airports, our water and sewer systems, our developed agricultural land. All of that is the wealth of the nation. And then you look at human infrastructure, you look at the educated population that we have, you look at the universities and the research institutions. All of those things are the true wealth of the nation. The wealth of the nation is not a bunch of gold sitting in Fort Knox, and it's not a bookkeeping entry. It's all of those things. Our economy is going to come back, but at this time, there's an opportunity to renew our water and sewer systems, by way of example. Many of them are more than 100 years old. And I know that in Jackson over the past few years, we've had some bad experiences with water pipes breaking, and you know, you don't miss your water till your well runs dry.
Right.
We can borrow money at historically low interest rates. We can renew our infrastructure, and the nation will be wealthier when we renew our water and sewer systems and improve our roads and keep them in good shape of repair than we are now. And we can put people to work who otherwise would be unemployed, enjoying unemployment. If they're working, they will be contributing to the economy. They'll have money to spend. It'll change people into taxpayers from people who are relying on public funds. It seems to me a win-win-win-win situation. The Department of well, I can't say the name, but the Buildings and Grounds folks have a list of hundreds of millions of dollars of repairs that need to be done on state buildings. We need to be doing that now.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to take our first caller. We invite you to join the program with us, and our first call is from Jim. Jim, go ahead with your question, please, sir. Do we have Jim? I believe we've lost Jim, but we encourage you to call in and with your questions this evening, and we'll pose them to the panel here and hopefully get some good information out to you.
Let me. I think I agree with Senator Bryan, and I think he's right on what we can do. But at the same time, when we look at bonds, we have to also look at debt service and what it would cost to the appropriation process, because we have to pay the debt service on that. So by no means, I don't think we ought to be bonding more. I think what we ought to do first, as a matter of priority, from my perspective, is renegotiate some of the bonds and see can we reduce some of the cost to the appropriation through debt service, one. The other thing, I think we've done a great job in this state in the last 4 or 5 years on producing good corporate jobs in this state. The Toyotas, the Nissan, and the job that the corporation you talked about coming in. I think we got to focus in on small business. Small business expansion and small business growth, grow your economy faster than anything. And thinking what we ought to be doing is looking at some tax incentive to help and some capital so that small business can grow their business. They employ faster than any other segment. And I'm always told by the best economists is that if you want to grow your economy fast, then support small business and let them grow and give them tax incentives.
All right, we're going to try the phones again. Now we have Billy from Attala County on the line with us. Billy, what's your question?
Happy New Year, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a 3-point question. Wouldn't the state employees and the teachers prefer to have a job and a pay free instead of job cutbacks? On that same vein, the high school students who play in football teams and play in the band are now having to pay their own way to buy instruments, to buy uniforms, to buy gas to football games, and to band evaluations. Thirdly, the highway funds have gone to bond funds instead of grants that were given by the federal government. You had to do a lot of application process and a lot of verification to make sure the roads were there and the roads were being used. But when you let the federal government know that there was a need for the roads and the need for bridge repair, then the feds would grant you the money to maintain it and to build the bridges and roads. And that's my general question.
Okay, Billy from Metallic County, who wants to field any portion of his question?
I'm not sure exactly what the question was about as far as that first part about the state employee. I'm not sure exactly what that was about, but the fact of the matter is that the road and bridge funds that come through the Department of Transportation are gasoline taxes that are paid. They go to the Washington and they come back to Mississippi, and that's how they're used, is to build highways, build bridges, maintain highways. We've had some stimulus funds for some projects that would not have been done without those, and put people to work and kept our contractors employing people. So I'm not sure exactly what he was trying to get to on that, but I was in the band, I played football, and we also had to help raise money for our uniforms, and we had to and this was years ago, you can imagine, back before electricity almost, but you had to have, we had to help raise money for our band uniforms, and we had to buy our own instruments as well, so I don't think that that's unusual. We need to do everything we can to fund classroom instruction and those things necessary to maintain classroom instruction, buildings and buses and all of those things. The extracurricular are just that, extra. So.
Well, you talk about education, and the governor has said on several occasions that companies come to Mississippi in part because of our well-trained workforce. But is our education system up to the task of continuing to educate folks who can take these jobs?
I think it is. I think our education system is moving in the right direction. I have, like everybody else that's in the legislature, have issues with certain things and want to address some of those things. But
you're talking within education, of
course. You know, one of the issues that I have is the state testing, the English 2 and the and I've got those tests, and on the floor as the education bills come out, I'm going to start reading these test questions and trying to see how many representatives can get the answers. I think that we need to look at another way on this testing, and we obviously need to know where we stand in relation to everyone else, but it's an expensive process. The ACT is available, and that's one of the things that we should look at as a way to use the ACT uniformly in a testing mode. We need to ensure that there's money in the classrooms, as Senator Burton said. The Stennis Institute came out with a report before, and it said, you know, fundamentally, in relation to the operation of a school district, when the school district it puts more money into the classroom, the children perform better. I mean, it's just fundamentally top to bottom, and we really need to look at that and work on that. And we need to help the teachers. You know, we have the STAR grading program now, the STAR school program, and Madison Central is not a STAR school, and everybody's surprised. Well, it should be. By all accounts, it should be a STAR school, but the formula is so skewed, and it's based on growth, that if you're at the top of your game and you grow small, then you don't meet the equation to become a STAR school. And and we need to address some of these things and encourage and lift up and build. And I think we're on our way. Chairman Brown has been receptive to some of the reform ideas the House Republicans have had, and Senator Carmichael in the Senate has been as well. And I think we're moving forward on that.
All right, well, let's move on now to some recent action on legislation. The State Senate debated for more than 4 hours yesterday before approving an immigration enforcement bill. The bill is called the Support Our Law Enforcement and Safe Neighborhoods Act of 2011. It would allow law enforcement officers to check on a person's immigration status if the subject has been stopped for a traffic violation. And among other provisions, it would toughen penalties on people who hire illegal immigrants. The principal author, Senator Joey Fillingame, defended the bill in the face of tough questioning. He says the measure will save jobs for Mississippians, improve national security, and cut the medical and education costs that illegal immigrants force upon the state. There were many additional authors on the bill, including one of our guests, Terry Burton. So, Senator, what's your reaction to the bill's passage?
Well, the bill was a work in progress, obviously, from the day we came to the legislature to the time it passed on the Senate floor, with several amendments offered and several passed on the floor. It was a work in progress. We did everything we could in committee before the Senator wanted to take it on to the floor to address the issues of racial profiling, address the issues of stopping someone simply because they have an accent, and to make sure that we don't do anything to demean the dignity of any human being out there. We were trying to do that through the process of amending the bill in committee and cleaning it up, getting away from some of that Arizona language that might be subject to interpretation by the courts as being unconstitutional. I don't know where the bill is going to go. I think that we do have a situation where the Immigrations and Customs Service can use and should use local law enforcement. They have that authority now, but it isn't being done to the point we need to. The only concern I have about the bill is what it might cost local governments in the way of enforcing the provisions of the bill, and the possibility that if they don't do that because of lack of money or whatever, that they could be sued. I can't believe that I had a part in creating a new tort action out there, but I did. But I think the good outweighs the bad on the bill. We'll see what happens on the House side and see where it goes. But I think that there's a call out there among the people of the state of Mississippi and the nation to do something about immigration status. There are so many millions of people who are here legally, and they deserve to have that mean something. And you can't do that and have illegal immigration or illegal aliens here in Mississippi or anywhere else in the country. It's not our job to police the borders, but it is our job to help the federal government police our borders.
Senator Bryan, you're one of 15 senators who voted to reject this bill. Why?
Well, first of all, I want to make it clear that I believe illegal immigration is a serious problem for the United States. It's primarily a federal concern. It seems to me one of the first things to do is to get control of the nation's borders. I think that the federal government is moving in the right direction in that area, but that clearly is a big task and takes a long time. Having said that, if there's something the state can do to help, I'm in favor of doing that. And several years back, I voted in favor of a bill which was said to help cut down on the number of illegal aliens in the state and the ease with which they could find employment. But when this bill came up, I think it was moving far too quickly and was far too unfinished for us to be considering. Senator Burton says it was a work in progress, and that's Senator Burton's in a generous mood. I think there was a provision of the bill as it came to floor that would actually send some money to Arizona, to a fund in Arizona, because it was modeled after an Arizona bill. To give the proponents credit, they did amend that to change it to a fund in Mississippi rather than a fund in Arizona. But the most serious problem is one Senator Burton just mentioned. Under this bill, if a citizen does not think his county sheriff department or his municipal police force is enforcing the national immigration laws as strictly as they should be, that individual can sue the city. That individual can sue the county. And if he's successful, the taxpayers of that city or the taxpayers of that county will have to pay damages. And it seems to me that's completely unnecessary. You can't sue a police department because you think they're not investigating murders properly. You can't sue a police department because you think they're not investigating robberies and break-ins and crimes. You just don't sue the police for their inability to enforce the laws as you would like them to have forced, because simply put, there's no end to it and there are limited resources, and any sheriff or policeman must make decisions about where to allocate those resources. I was disappointed that when an amendment was offered to remove that provision from the bill, and as one of the members of the Senate pointed out, you could still bring an action and get an injunction to require the police force to be more strident if that's what you want to do. But that amendment was defeated by the proponents of the bill, so they put a number of us in a position where we just did not feel like we could vote to allow anybody in the state of Mississippi to sue our police chief back home and conceivably have the taxpayers of the cities we represent pay damages. That didn't seem to us to be necessary.
Senator Bryan's right, and I had some real heartburn over that issue. I really did.
Well, as you said, work in progress.
I would like to say, since Terry has said what he said, we're both in a situation where we would like very much to be able to vote yes, but, or no, but.
Right.
And unfortunately, we can't. But I think it's interesting that as though although we voted differently on that bill, we have some of the same concerns about that. And our general position on this issue is much closer than you might think.
So perhaps there's some compromise down the road. We want to bring in an email now. This is from Bo. This is for everyone. He says, I would like to ask that each legislator here, if they would approve of such legislation if it were made mandatory that each citizen of the state and persons passing through be required to carry evidence of their U.S. citizenship on them at all times. Mr. Baker, we'll start with you. Would you support something that says you have to have proof of U.S. citizenship? I guess just like proof of insurance when you're driving your car.
I hadn't thought about it. I don't know what he's talking about. I mean, I carry a driver's license. Are we talking about a photo ID, a birth certificate, a passport? I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
Mr. Flaggs?
Well, I'm like Representative Baker. I don't understand it enough, but I do know this, that in my opinion, I believe that this whole thing about debating the immigration bill in the Senate is more political and it's untimely. I agree with the governor. Again, I know people question me when I agree with the governor, but the governor says it's not a priority. We're not Texas, we're not Arizona, we're not New Mexico. We don't have a border problem. What we ought to be doing is wait and see what happened to the Arizona law as it relates to the Constitution. And whether or not it's constitutional, not those provisions that one of the federal courts have already struck down and gets the Supreme Court and then makes them. We got to fund education, fund mental health, fund other areas. My priorities are those things that relates to Mississippi, that impact Mississippi in their classroom, in their homes, in their kitchen, and keeping food on their tables. And all this thing about doing these emotional things, these things that divide us and not unite us. I'm trying to stay away from those, and I hope that we can agree to that and get on down the road and get down the road and fund these things that are priorities of this state, rather than getting caught up in all these political enhancement campaigns.
And let me say, I respect Chairman Flaggs immensely. I disagree with him on this. It is a priority, and when you talk about funding education and funding mental health, the dollars that we're putting into education and mental health are also funding situations involving illegal immigration. The cost of illegal immigration makes that cost go up. The Lieutenant Governor's got a report. There are other reports out there. The cost of illegal immigration to the state of Mississippi. I understand the governor's position. I understand the senator's position on this, but fundamentally, we've got to secure our borders, and we've got to ensure that those are here legally, and those that are not here, we have to address. And that's just the way it is.
I think the House take that same position. We believe that if you're illegal, you shouldn't be in the state. If you're illegal, you shouldn't be entitled to programs that are paid for by the taxpayer. But at the same time, we think we have a priority system, and that is funding education, making certain that we don't return back to the days where mental patients are being held in jail, rather than going out on this political expedition about trying to enhance campaign.
Well, wait a minute now. If the issue is whether or not someone's here legally, and you agree with that, then what effect is it? What additional effect is it when a legitimate traffic stop is made? A legitimate traffic stop is made with reasonable suspicion and probable cause to make the stop. What additional effort to verify that person, to look for the clues to determine if that person is here legally, and to follow that through?
That's okay, Representative Baker. But when you get to the point of creating an unfunded mandate to the local level for the local sheriff, the local police department to do unnecessary things. Now, if you find somebody illegal, I think you need to turn them in. You do what you're supposed to do. But through the discussion here tonight, you've already admitted that in the bill is an unfunded mandate.
Well, now that's the Senate bill.
Well, I would hope that, and I think we will address it in the House. I'd hope you will agree with me, and the Republican conference will agree with me. Let's do those things that are not a cost to the state, so that we won't be taken from the classroom. We won't be taken from mental health.
I guess this is the beginning of the 4-hour debate that the senators had the other day on that. We haven't had our debate yet.
It is a truly it generates conversation, to say the very least, this issue around the country, not just in Mississippi, and here we are discussing it here as well. We have Tim on the line now who has a question about immigration, illegal immigration. Tim, go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, sir. I would like to know where everybody on the show stands on this question. I've been in construction for 15 years, all my life. I've done it all my life. I've been married 17 years, the only thing I've done longer. I've been everything from a man that runs a shovel to a superintendent. I can run anything on the job site. But I've been laid off since June of last year. And I go every week. I go to different job sites, and I ask the superintendent, do you have a job? I'll do anything you need, anything. I got to get off this unemployment. And they say, no, sir, I don't have a spot for you. I just don't have a spot for you. But if you look around, 40 to 60% of the employees on this job site are illegal immigrants that don't speak English. And I mean that affects everybody out here, but it affects us in the construction more. And I just want to know where everybody stands on that.
Well, gentlemen, I feel your pain. In fact, you described my life growing up. I pulled myself up on my own bootstrap by doing the same thing you said. But if that's the case, then won't the Republican penalize the manufacturer, the employer, for hiring illegal people in the first place, and not penalize the taxpayers by sending unfunded mandate to the local level?
We have. We passed that legislation. It's a stair-step approach, and employers over a certain number, and by next year, I think all employers over 50 or 100 have to comply with the E-Verify, and if they don't, there are state fines involved. What the caller said is real important, because it identifies the issue. He is trying to obtain employment where he is competing against someone who is here illegally. But more importantly, that person who has that job is also competing against someone else who's hiring legal labor and is paying workers' comp and withholding and the costs and expenses involved with having legal labor. And this contractor is hiring someone with illegal labor. So not only is Tim, I think, is out of a job, but also the contractor who's competing against the contractor where Tim went on that job site to get that job is out of a job.
I want to make it clear, I supported the legislation that you mentioned that's on the books to try to crack down on those who are employing the people illegally. But the caller, I think, makes a good point. This is someone who's been working, as he says, working for a living all his life, and now finds himself, through no fault of his own, because of the economic downturn, unable to get work. And once again, if we would take this opportunity to put people like the caller to work, rebuilding our decaying water and sewer systems, maintaining roads, repairing our existing buildings, making them more energy efficient, which saves money and energy costs down the road, and on and on and on. We could provide jobs, which clearly the caller wants, and there are other people out there just like the caller who've been working that want jobs, and the ability to provide jobs through infrastructure improvements is something that the state could and should be doing.
And Tim, I co-authored the bill, I supported the bill, I voted for the bill, and I also supported that E-Verify bill that everybody's talking about that we passed several years ago, where employers are to verify that the people they hire are citizens. If you know for sure that 40 to 60% of the people on that job site are illegal, you should make a report to somebody.
But we talked a little bit about, and the senators talked about, the problem in the bill about requiring the local law enforcement to do what they need to do. I know of a situation. I have a constituent who has a company that competes with a new company that came to town that's hiring illegal immigrants, and he has communicated with the federal agencies that are involved, with all the state agencies. You can't find anybody in the state agency. Nobody takes responsibility for this. It's hard to get the feds on board on this. And so we have got to change the way of thinking, and we have got to make somebody in the state of Mississippi responsible to enforce the federal laws that are not being enforced by the federal government. And if that means down to the county level and to the municipal level, then we have to do it. Now, I agree, being punitive to the local law enforcement in a sense of damages is an issue that I have to look at. But there are ways around that. There are ways to address that. There are ways to make that fundamentally more sound to where that can happen, because when this employer cannot find any relief and he has to lay off 200 people because he cannot compete on contract after contract after contract and nobody will help, then we're losing jobs up one end and down the other.
Clearly, we could spend the whole hour talking about this
I'm just
issue.
glad Representative Baker is beginning to agree with Senator Bryan and some of us on the House. So if the fact the bill come up on the House, I'm going to depend on him to help us with some of the amendments that are being offered on the floor. And I appreciate that kindness.
I'm with you.
All right, let's move on. Let's talk about payday lending. And Representative Flaggs, you authored a bill that would change the law regarding payday lending. Tell us how this would affect folks.
Well, first of all, that the payday lending bill wouldn't sunset to next year, but because most payday lenders, check cashier, borrow money on a 5-year business model, we brought the bill forth. We had hearings on it, and I just think that there is a perception out there that payday lending, in fact, the annual percentage rate is too high for the state. It was about 5.97. So
5.97%.
So what I did is, in simple terms, I thought that the consumer, which is our constituency, needed a little bit more time to pay the loan. I didn't want to put them out of business. So what I did is I did a 2-tier. If you borrow up to $200, you can get it for $20 less by going from $21.95 to $20 per 100, and you had up to 21 days to pay it off. If you borrow $201 up to $500 being the cap, because you don't want to go into a small loan and payment type plans, you can borrow that money at $21.95, but you had a minimum of 28 days and a maximum of 30 days to pay it. And I thought that was not only fair and balanced, but I thought that was good for the payday lender and good for our constituents, the consumer, because I gave them a little more time. I made the adjustment. The only way that you can reduce the percentage, annual percentage rate, is to reduce the payment, the fee, or you had to lessen, give longer time, and that's what I try to do as a compromise. And I barely got it passed, and I encourage payday lenders or anybody, if you want that bill to become law, then have the Senate to pass it on to the governor so he can sign it, because that's the best I think we can get out of the House. And it was a fair compromise between the two. And if I ever got phone calls on a bill, it was Devon. But ironically, it was not the customer or my constituent. It was the payday lender themselves, negotiating within themselves how much profit margin they want to lose.
Well, Senator Burton, how will the Senate treat this bill?
I'm not sure. I'm not on the Business and Financial Institutions Committee, which is where I assume the bill will go. Senator Gary Jackson will have that bill in his committee, and I'm sure they will give it due consideration, having it passed the House as it has. It's been an issue that's been talked about for years. There's a local attorney there in my hometown who has talked to me about this at the Rotary Club meetings for the last 5 or 6 years, I know, saying we've got to do something about this. And he's right. We need to do something about it. There is a need for this type of credit availability for people who just can't get money anywhere else. If the car breaks down and if the child needs clothes, whatever the case may be, and they just can't go to the bank, as tight as banks are getting now particularly, there is a need for this type of lending. But the predatory nature of it is what bothers me. This, don't pay me back this week, let's roll it over again. Pay me back next time, let's roll it over again. That bothers me, and I think anything we can do to keep the businesses viable, keep the option out there, but make sure that the predatory nature is reduced considerably or done away with. I would hope we'd be able to do that.
Senator Bryan?
I think Representative Flaggs is a lot more familiar with the intricacies of payday lending than I.
Very good.
I know he is, where I'm concerned.
We have a caller now. Terry joins us on the line. Terry, what is your question, please?
My question would be would Mississippi and the United States be better off without all these payday lending companies that has popped up all over across America today?
They do seem to be in clusters in certain neighborhoods. You see lots of them. Would we be better off without them?
Well, let me just share with this. Payday lending is an opportunity or a means for somebody to borrow money from one payday payday to another payday. Now, I think the issue was, and I think Senator Burton has so eloquent described the issue was predatory lending. I think what caused that practice was that the time to pay back was too short, and because of that, that's the reason why I gave them more time to pay, which lowered the annual percentage rate almost in half for the bigger loans, and then the smaller loans we got within 500-something, we lowered it also. But let me just say something about payday lending. Payday lenders are a small business. They inherit these businesses from their family when they went into existence. They borrow money. They employ 3,100 people. 3,100 people in this state. They got an annual income of $6 to $8 million. And when you start putting 3,100 people out of work, when unemployment is approaching 10%, I think that is punity. And what I tried to do, and I take all the blame for this, what I tried to do is be fair to the consumer, which is my constituency, and be fair to the business person, and I came down the middle. And I don't think anybody out there is totally happy, but I'm telling you, this model moves us from 50 to about 13 or 14 in the nation.
All right.
I think the caller has a good point, and the issue he's raising is it ever going to be possible to properly regulate this industry so that, to take the example Senator Burton has of someone who's needs to get a car fixed and desperately needs some relatively small amount of money for some relatively short period of time. Is there any way ever to have an industry which provides that service without becoming predatory? And I don't have an answer to the caller's question, but I think he asked a good question.
All right, thank you. Another major task for the 2011 session is the job of redistricting. Every 10 years, the U.S. Census determines the population of Mississippi and all the other states. And with that new data come new voting districts and precincts. The Joint Legislative Committee on Reapportionment and Redistricting handles much of the work. They expect to get the official census numbers for local level populations early next month, and they have until June 1st to get federal approval of their new district maps. Otherwise, the state may have to hold 2 legislative elections, one with the old districts, one with the new plan, and that's just what happened 10 years ago. So Senator Burton, he chairs the Joint Legislative Reapportionment Committee. What are your thoughts on this process?
We are working very closely with our Senate subcommittee. I'm working with individual members of the Senate in looking at the individual districts. We have had hearings around the state. We had 12 meetings around the state to hear input from the citizenry at times and locations where we were very, very accessible. We will have another round of hearings the middle of next month. After the census numbers get here, we will have another round of hearings, one in each of the 4 areas of the state, the Delta, North Mississippi, Central, and South. We are expecting that the House and Senate will continue to work together to prepare 2 plans that we can take to our respective floors and pass across the hall to each other and have those plans in time, passed in time to meet the deadlines with federal approval by the Justice Department and so forth. We work this process every 10 years, and it's not an easy process.
It's a lot of work in a small amount of time.
It is, and people ask me, is it a bear or is it a lamb? And I said, well, it's always a bear. There's never a time when it's not a bear when you're dealing with 52 districts in the Senate, 122 in the House. We have great committee members. They're very, very concerned about making sure we don't have to run 2 years in a row. Nobody benefits from that, certainly not the taxpayers of the state of Mississippi, in having to have elections for the legislature this year and then again next year because we don't get our job done. I think we will get it done. I think we'll get it done on time. I think the Justice Department will approve those districts and that we will move forward with our elections as scheduled, and the qualifying deadline is June 1st, as you said.
Senator Bryan, you're also on that committee.
Well, in your intro, I think you mentioned the back-to-back elections. Right. Those were in 1991 and 1992. That's correct. However troubling it may be, that was 20 years ago. It wasn't 10 years ago.
That's true.
Seems like 10 years ago. It should be, but it was 20 years ago. 10 years ago, the legislature did redistrict itself. Our plans were approved by the Justice Department and elections were held on schedule. Senator Burton's exactly right. That's what we need to do this time. It's not an easy job, but it's our responsibility, and we can and should do it.
Gentlemen, your thoughts?
Well, I think Senator Burton and Senator Bryan are probably the best and brightest minds at this table on redistricting. And
well, not merely redistricting.
Based upon what I'm hearing in the hallway from Republicans and from Democrats, from Senator Burton, from Representative Reynolds, from the Speaker of the House, from the Lieutenant Governor, from the inside of the Capitol, I believe that it's going to be done, and it's going to be done in a timely manner. I think if the attitudes stay the same and they keep working together, I think they can get it done. Now, if there's outside interference, it's anybody's game. But from the legislative perspective, I think that if they continue to share 122 input on the House side, 52 on the Senate side, work with the Republican. I'm bringing you in this time. I'm going to throw you something this time. Work with the Republicans. I think we can get it done.
This is yet another joint committee where there's very little House Republican representation. We have one House Republican on this particular committee. There are 51 Republicans in the House, and we are hopeful that a plan will be prepared. We are working with the party, the Republican Party in the state of Mississippi, and we've hired a consultant team, a plan drawing team, and we're hopeful that our plan is going to match that plan.
We'll be watching.
And we're going to see.
All right, very good, gentlemen. That's all the time we have for tonight. Many thanks to Senators Bryan and Terry Burton, Representatives Mark Baker and George Flaggs, and to you for joining our discussion. We'll soon have this edition Quorum available online at mpbonline.org, and we thank you for joining us.
To access an educational component related to this program, visit www.mpbonline.org.